Hi there, everyone. I'm Regina, and I want to thank you for joining me today because I know that this is a tough topic, and I know that none of you wants to be here. Everybody wishes that they were not in this spot. But you're joining me today because you want to know the 3 secrets to how my clients are cooperatively divorcing their husbands without spending thousands and thousands of dollars on lawyers and without dooming their children to a lifetime of therapy. So you might be in this spot where you know that your marriage is over, but you are terrified of the process, of the financial and emotional cost of actually moving through the divorce, right? But what if there was a better way? Okay, and I think you must know in your gut, if you're signing on to watch this class, that there's got to be a better way, right? So you're going to feel better when I tell you that, guess what? You actually can create a step-by-step, smooth family transition that will save you months of time, thousands of dollars, and really, most importantly, spare yourself and your children the trauma of the process. Okay, so it's really the 21st century family transition. And what it is a new model for ending your marriage that gives you emotional support and practical information you need to methodically address every issue in your divorce, while also taking it slow and honoring really the emotions that come up that really are the foundation for why divorce is so horrible in our society today. And so you're probably thinking, like, seriously? But I'm dead serious. Seriously, you can do this even if you think your spouse won't cooperate, and even if there's been trauma in your marriage, like an affair or emotionally controlling behavior, and even if, as you sit there right now, you always thought you had to have a lawyer to get divorced. So what I want you keeping in the back of your mind as we're going through this is that actually 85% of divorces are filed by women in the world today, certainly in the United States. I don't know where you are as you're watching this, but that means that it's really very rare that a couple will mutually at the same time decide that it's time to get a divorce. Usually one person is the one who says, you know what, enough is enough. It's time to, have something healthier in our lives. So what I want you to be comfortable with is the idea that it doesn't matter if you feel like you're the one driving this train right now. Once your spouse understands how a family transition works and that this is your intent, they almost 100% of the time get on board, because who doesn't want to save themselves thousands of dollars and emotional trauma, right? So the next piece of that puzzle is the idea that the average divorce in the United States costs families $30,000. So that's roughly, $15,000 per spouse. They each have to go out and hire individual lawyers, and they very quickly blow through that initial retainer, and it just adds up from there. And so I feel like that's money much better spent on establishing your foundation for your new chapter, your next page. And it's money that certainly is better in your pocket than in the lawyer's, right? So keeping that in mind also helps spouses, get on board with this idea of a family transition. So I've been doing this for about 4 years, and here's just a couple excerpts of things my clients have said. I truly never thought I'd be sitting here feeling okay and maybe even good about the divorce. And I hope others who were as broken as I was by the decision of their spouse can be encouraged by my story. If you take a second and look through these, you'll see that the fear of the process slowly goes away as you get into a family transition and you realize, you know what, we have this. We're going to be okay. We're going to take it a step at a time and really manage our process. So let's get right into it. I want to talk to you about the 3 secrets to divorcing without spending $10,000 plus on lawyers or damaging yourself and your kids. Okay, this is a totally different process. I know that you're terrified, and that's where everybody starts. We start from this place of absolute fear, which keeps us stuck, but your fear is well justified because the traditional system is designed to increase the trauma. It's actually literally designed that way. So society has this big belief that divorce needs to be destructive, but it's actually a big lie. The traditional process is like universally destructive, but it does not need to be that way. You don't need to go through the traditional process. And what we're talking about today is how you actually can avoid all of that destruction. All right, so you might not have known before right now that divorce actually doesn't need to be destructive. And you might have thought in your gut, like I said, that there's got to be an easier, more straightforward way. And you're absolutely right. There totally is. And at the end of this webinar, you're going to know how to get started on your step-by-step family transition. So this is actually really big and really eye-opening to a lot of people. It's an entirely new way of thinking about ending a marriage. I don't even like to use the word divorce because it's so harsh. So we are dissolving your marriage or untangling yourself from an unhealthy situation. But if you're serious about avoiding the trauma and the expense of the traditional process, this 45 minutes is going to be really, really valuable. All right, so my goal moving forward now is for you to be comfortable with the idea that you can methodically create this family transition. And I'm going to show you the 3 most important things to remember to get started on this road. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, right? My name is Regina DeAngelis, and I've been in family law for 22 years, but I spent 18 of those years as a traditional family law attorney, which, you know, going in, negotiating divorces, dragging people into court, you know, with a lawyer on each side. And most importantly, I've been through my own traumatic divorce, which was so frustrating for me because I knew it didn't need to be that way. But when you've got 2 lawyers driving the train, they kind of hijack the process and you just are along for the ride. So throughout this saga that I've been on myself for the last 22 years, I've learned intimately how and why the traditional system is so fatally flawed. And I've learned, most importantly, how to avoid that trap. So here's me and my 3 kids, you know, all dressed up, gussied up for Christmas. And then like what we really look like on an average day. And I've really worked hard to sort of spare them the trauma of the process, but they've still been through a traditional process with, you know, like very strict pick up, drop off, custody times. And that's really because that's how my ex-husband wanted it to be. And as they've gotten older, even the kids get better at managing that situation. So as I was going through all of this myself and working in this industry, I got more and more frustrated because it became more and more obvious that the traditional system is designed to destroy, and it takes families and makes them adversaries. Like literally, you're a family on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, your lawyer says, I'm going to serve the papers. and all of a sudden you're plaintiff and defendant. And it's really, I think, a completely backward system when we're talking about human beings and a family. It was so frustrating because I knew it didn't need to be that way, and I really didn't want to be part of the problem. You know, as my family life, and my older son is sick with a condition called Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which makes him progressively weaker. And at 19, he's in a wheelchair full time. And as my marriage was falling apart, I was surrounded by negativity at work and at home, right? I'm dealing with all of this sadness and stress at home, and all of this frustration at work, where I was kind of trapped myself within a system where I was struggling to really feel like I was helping families the way I wanted to. So that experience brought me to an epiphany that was like, I can't do this anymore. I no longer want to be part of the problem. I am going to figure out a way to try and save families the trauma that my own family was going through, and really try and be a force for good, right? Like, I'm going to help you get through this process in a way that leaves you healthy on the other side. And so even saving one family from the trauma that I've witnessed dozens and dozens of times in my career, and then some of what my own kids have gone through, makes me feel so gratified that I could be potentially helping people save their children from repeating these patterns in the future, right? And figuring out why they're struggling in their relationships down the road, or struggling with anxiety or depression or addiction. So that's really why Family Transitions was born. And it's been a fabulous journey. And I'm so glad that you're here on this webinar to learn how you can do this for your own family, all right? And instead of being part of the problem now, I really feel like I can help you create a 21st century family transition, sort of the anti-divorce, and have it be much smoother than you ever dreamed might be possible. So I want you to know it's not just a pipe dream. It's not some Pollyanna idea. It actually works. And here's just one example of a client who was so grateful. They wrote to me and talked about how they learned through this process that it really is a transition. You have to kind of change your mindset from we're dismantling something or destroying something to we are building something new. And what is that going to look like? You know, when this is over, if you do it correctly, if you follow the guidance, you actually rebuild your ability to co-parent. In a lot of cases with my clients, they actually rebuild a friendship when they can barely speak or look at each other when they get started. So it's really very, very transformational for families. All right. And if you want this too, which I'm sure that you do, I want you to visualize what you want. Like, think of yourself on the other side. You know, is it you in a cute new little bungalow house with your garden and your happy kids? Is it you at a birthday party and with your ex-spouse there, but everyone's able to get along and spend time together and be there for your kids? All of those things are absolutely possible. I want you to imagine what it would be like to be in that new chapter, and then think about what it would be like if you could get there without going through the traumatic process. If you could snap your fingers and be on that other side. Think about how much pride you would feel at what you had accomplished, and how grateful you would be for being able to be in that spot without having caused your children any trauma. So that's what we're going to get you started on today. So let's get right into it. Okay, so what we're going to cover are these 3 secrets: how you can end your marriage without destroying yourself, your kids, or your net worth; how you can do this even if you have no legal background and you're worried about confidently making decisions for your family. Okay. And the last one, which is my personal favorite, is why running to lawyers at the first sign of divorce or the first discussion of a separation is really the biggest mistake that you can make. All right, so let's start with number 1 here, okay? You can end your marriage without destroying yourself, your kids, and your net worth by creating a conscious, deliberate family transition. So what I discovered, my epiphany, is that the old system literally engulfs people on purpose in shame and blame. And when I say you've got to be adversaries, whoever files that paperwork becomes the accuser, essentially, and puts the other person on the defensive to defend why they're not a horrible person. And the system is designed that way because it's based on the old idea of a fault-based divorce. This is a completely antiquated idea, right? Back in the olden days, which really weren't that old, like back into the even 1960s, 70s, and even the 1980s in this country, you could not get divorced unless you could prove the fault of the other person. So that means they were abusive, they're an alcoholic, they're in some way have failed, and you are now entitled to a divorce. And that's why the system, even though we now call it a no-fault divorce in everywhere in the United States, we call it a no-fault divorce, but the system didn't change. It's still set up to gather information that we can use to blame the other party. So what I discovered was that that is completely ridiculous, and I'm sure even listening to me, it sounds ridiculous, okay? Families facing divorce need emotional support and practical tools. They don't need to be turned into the victim and the villain in this situation. And the truth of the matter is that most spouses are literally doing the best that they know how, the best that they can, even if it's, not what you need. You wouldn't be here listening to me if it was fulfilling what you needed. But society sets us up with expectations and, for lack of a better word, gender roles for how a marriage is supposed to look. And as we get more and more focused on fulfilling our role, we lose sight of what the other party might be needing within this relationship. And so I think certainly for the vast majority of my clients, when they come to me, they're so heartbroken because they spent a lifetime, 20 years, 30 years trying to fulfill all of those expectations, and they thought they were doing a really good job. And when their husband or their wife says, I think it's time for me to move on, I think this is over, it's absolutely devastating. But really, you have to take that blame out of it and really believe that it's nobody's fault. You are doing the best that you can, but obviously 50% of marriages are going to end up in this spot for reasons that are so complex. It's a topic for another class, right? So let's accept that this is where we are, and we're going to now make the best out of a bad situation and figure out how to move forward in a positive way. So this works even if there's been trauma in your marriage. I'm going to move myself out of the way here. Trauma in your marriage, such as an affair or such as emotionally controlling behavior, or what psychologists today are calling narcissistic abuse. And some of you might be just discovering what that is, but even if that's what you've been suffering, number one, you're certainly not alone. I would say at least half of my clients have been in that situation or are in that situation. Even with those things happening in the background, you can create a conscious family transition. So I want to give you the example of one set of clients, Michelle and Joe, okay? This is a long-term 20+ year marriage, 2 kids in college, and you know, Joe's out working a lot. Michelle is keeping all the balls in the air. She's also working and getting incredibly lonely in her relationship. So without expecting it, without looking for it, you end up in an emotional entanglement with someone that you shouldn't be in an emotional entanglement with. And it's really hard to work your way back. When those sorts of things happen, it's very eye-opening to the bigger problems in the marriage. But what happened with this couple is that even though they were both devastated at the loss of this long-term marriage, when they came to me, they could barely speak, barely look at each other. They really stayed focused on wanting to sort of rebuild or not lose all of those years of history. And by doing that, they were able to very deliberately, calmly talk about what needed to be addressed to separate assets, really build 2 separate lives. And in the end, they actually built in, you know, they were started out weekly. They don't necessarily need to do that anymore, but weekly check-ins and lunch so that they could talk about where each of them were. They became sounding boards for each other in their new situations. And that's not something that you might want for you or that you can envision for yourself right now. But it's important for you to understand that when you do it this way, you hold all the cards. So you set the boundaries of what you want that new relationship to look like. But by doing it as a family transition, you know that you're not destroying any chance that you might have of a future friendship and certainly amicable relationship with your ex. All right. So common questions I get about how the heck do you create a family transition, even when you think a new way won't work for you because your spouse won't cooperate. I want to tell you that it's actually not a problem, because usually even reluctant spouses are willing to try. They're willing to hear you out because they are attracted to the idea of saving themselves months of time and thousands of dollars. And again, the trauma of the process, nobody, is willingly subjects themselves to that. So often, again, it's just about educating your spouse, like, hey, there actually is something else we can be doing here. We don't need to run out and hire 2 lawyers, right? So another question that I get is, but my spouse refuses to do anything that I suggest. If I say the sky is blue, he's going to say it's red, just because we've created this pattern of communication where it's just constant disagreement, right? So that's actually not a problem either, because you could say to your spouse, I'm choosing something different for myself. You're free to do whatever you want. But my clients still are guided through this process in an emotionally intelligent way that honors what they're feeling, and really understands how to communicate with their spouse to sort of diffuse the situation so that they can rebuild some communication and really spare themselves and their children the trauma of the constant fighting. So, and the last one that I get, the most common question, is that you might think this is never going to work because it's impossible to get divorced without a lawyer, especially when there's kids and assets involved. but that's absolutely not true. And in fact, it's kind of a myth that's perpetrated by the system, because what would happen if nobody got family law attorneys when they decided they were getting divorced, right? So with a family transition, you're guided to understand, be educated on everything that you need to know to have these conversations with your spouse. So the bottom line is, you don't need to subject yourself at all to the toxic system to resolve any of the issues in your divorce. You can transition your family to a happy two-household family. It is a different sort of family unit. So again, it's about mindset. Instead of destroying, what you've known, what you've built, you are building something else. You are simply transforming it to look like something else. And that something else really allows you to thrive as an individual. And when you're thriving, your kids are thriving. And it is so important. All right, so that really brings us to secret number 2. Like, well, how the heck do we do this? I don't know anything about the legal system. But even if you don't know anything about the legal system, you can still dramatically reduce the typical financial and emotional trauma and create a conscious family transition. And it's way easier than you might think, right? So some common questions I get, and how I discovered this, is that when I quit practicing law, I realized that families want guidance. But when you go out to hire a lawyer, they start posturing right away. They start collecting ammunition. And so what you really are longing for is guidance on how to move forward in a positive way, not how to, one up your spouse in court, not legal games that are going to cost you a fortune. So an example are my clients, Rachel and Rich. They had what a lot of you would think is sort of a complex situation. It was not just a typical 2-job family. There was actually a business involved that, they needed to figure out how to preserve, because that's how they are, paying the bills. So you can't go through the process just with the bottom line in mind. You've got to make really careful decisions about how to move forward. And a divorce lawyer, their job is to preserve you, their individual client's best interest. They're looking at just that bottom line. They're not looking at the family as a whole. Okay, so the process of a family transition keeps you in control, keeps you envisioning how you want this to look when it's over. Okay, not something that the lawyers are concerned about. So, but still, people are understandably nervous about trying to navigate divorce on their own. So you might think that won't work for you because you don't know anything about the legal system, but actually, the issues involved in dissolving a marriage are universal, and they're actually not even legal issues. They're like math issues. It's a math game in a lot of ways. It's a planning game where you have to take it slow because, upending your life saying, hey, we're getting divorced and we're, now I need a place to live. That is obviously the most traumatic way you can go about it. But if you keep in mind that the issues are universal and you can easily understand what they are, you can easily be taught what you need to make sure that you address, you feel an entirely new sense of confidence going through this process. So navigating it on your own and creating a conscious family transition, if you're worried about it being risky, it's really not. You need to just make sure that you have all the information that you need. And so that's the process I do with my clients. I make sure that they are fully educated, that they understand what needs to be addressed so that nothing is left out. And in fact, we include things that a court would never include. And we'll talk about that in a second. But, you know, I want you to kind of feel better thinking about, hey, this isn't risky. If we're following a step-by-step process that covers all of the bases, we're not, you know, forgetting anything in this process. Okay. And so you might be thinking, well, that won't work because we have unique circumstances and I'm going to need to make sure I have a lawyer who's covering all of that. But really, unique circumstances are best designed for a family transition because a court shuffles families through the system with a very cookie cutter approach. Everybody's custody order looks the same. Everybody's asset distribution looks the same within certain parameters. But when you stay in control, you can really think about what makes sense. What are you trying to achieve for your family? A silly example, but it's very kind of common, is the pets. And people get heartbroken about what to do with the animals. A court will never address those things. Pets are property to a court, and you know, you might be thinking of them practically as another child or as your only child. So we can do all sorts of creative things in terms of addressing the animals and the pets. And you have the flexibility to do what makes sense, right? So you address things in a way a court never would. Another bigger example is alimony. You know, most courts set a flat amount of alimony for a set number of years. And it's really, again, a very cookie cutter approach, but that doesn't make sense at all for a lot, if not all couples, right? This is an area where you might need some flexibility, where it's expected that your earnings are going to go up over time. So maybe it makes sense for alimony to go down a little bit. You want to take into consideration, you know, if someone loses a job, if someone becomes disabled, all of those things can get built into a separation or a divorce agreement in a way that a court does not address them. And that's because the system is overloaded. The system doesn't have time to really look at you as individuals. They want to keep people moving through the process. So a family transition gives you the flexibility to really control what your future looks like. That means that in the end, when you are given the practical information that is universal to every divorce, as well as understand that you can be flexible, there are no rules when you are doing it yourself. There is no, it has to be that way. You have the flexibility to address your personal circumstances, then you can confidently decide all the aspects of your divorce and make those decisions on your own. Okay, and it's really, you know, so liberating for people when they feel like, hey, you know, it doesn't have to be a certain way. Like we can finagle this that in a way that looks at what our work schedules are, what our, you know, housing situation is. We can control the timelines in a way that a court would not allow you to do. It really gives control of your life back to you. Which brings me to secret number 3, all right? Why running to lawyers at the first sign of the D word isn't necessary, and I promise you could actually be the worst thing that you could do. And you might be like, well, that makes like 0 sense. You know, how do people do this otherwise? Or why would a lawyer who is supposed to protect me be a bad idea? All right, so here's how I discovered this, okay? I did this for 18 years the traditional way. I saw case after case where the parties go out, they hire 2 lawyers. They even come to me and they say, hey, we're planning on having a really amicable divorce. It's going to be easy. Well, you know what? The best intentions get thrown out the door when your spouse goes out and hires a lawyer who isn't interested in that, who is interested in, they will say, doing their job, but will say things like, she's not entitled to that. Why would you agree to pay her that much money when I can get it down to this? And they don't tell the clients that, yeah, I might win in court. I might actually get, your child support down from $1,400 a month to $1,000 a month, but you're going to pay me $250 or $350 an hour, and it's going to take 6 months. So the lawyers ramp up the anger. They keep you focused on, I guess, you as an individual, the what they can do for just you, without filling you in on the detail that even if they win in the end, you're going to end up in the same place financially. And in a lot of cases, if not all, you end up worse off financially. On paper, you might have won more, but you owe your lawyer $40,000 or $50,000. And that's not an exaggeration. Like, the legal fees very quickly ramp up when the lawyers convince you that they're going to fight for what you deserve. And so one example of that is this couple where he wanted to stay out of court, do this cooperatively, through mediation, through this family transition program. And she was nervous about that, which, we've explained why. I mean, I understand why people are scared. So she went to a lawyer who said to her, I understand that you want the house, but you can't get him out. I mean, the truth of the matter is, and some of you might be experiencing this now, both of you have a right to be in the house. My clients are guided and counseled on how to do that successfully so that you can actually save tons of money and figure out, like, step by step, methodically, how and where you're going to move. But if that's not done correctly, that becomes a really intolerable situation. So she wasn't willing to kind of play that out. So she orchestrated an argument, trumped up abuse charges, had a protection from abuse or a restraining order filed against him, which removed him involuntarily from the house. And then he had to go out, get a lawyer, fight these charges. It took 4 months because, you file it, then it's continued, then you have to get a lawyer, the lawyers talk, then it's continued again. By the time they got to court, it was 4 months later. He, of course, wins. The abuse allegations are thrown out, but he can't go back into the house. He was forced out of the house without any notice, and their ability to communicate was completely destroyed. And this all happened at the start of the divorce, before any discussion had happened about, like, hey, what is this going to look like for the kids? What's child support going to be? Like, before anything else happened. And then they were each out over $10,000 in lawyers' fees before anything happened. And it's a year later, and they are still not done the divorce. So that's just an example of how the lawyers can really hijack the process, okay? So there's some common myths about lawyers. You might think they're necessary. You might look at that horror story and be like, hey, that's not going to be us. I would never do that. But I still need a lawyer to file my paperwork at the end. And that's just really not true. At the very, very end, after you've reached a full agreement, you might want a lawyer to look over your paperwork and, like, what's the expression? Cross the T's and dot the I's so that it goes smoothly through the courthouse. But in reality, if you don't want that person, you don't need them. My clients, the people in my program, I help them fill out all of that paperwork on their own. I teach them where to get it. It's online in every place, anywhere you could possibly live, you can access these forms. And your worst case scenario, if you want to try and do it yourself and it's wrong, the court sends it back to you and you have to do it again. So, you know, they will guide you as well through it. So you don't need lawyers to create your own paperwork. Okay, the next one, you might think they're necessary to protect you, right? And I'm sure that's what that woman in the last story was doing. She thought her lawyer was fighting for her. He's going to get her the house. And that is what they call a Pyrrhic victory, right? It's self-sabotage. She did get the house in the end, but she destroyed her co-parenting relationship with her spouse, the father of her children, who are very young. And now she's looking at years of kind of recovering or trying to rebuild from that, not to mention the financial losses that are involved. So it's just not true that they protect you. And in fact, they can make it much, much worse. And you don't need them if you're being guided as to what issues need to be talked about. And like I said, the issues are universal and they're finite, which means there's only so many. So you can easily be told what those issues are and figure it out on your own. Really, most divorces are sort of like a math game, right? You add up what you have and then you look at how you're going to share what is there. And the last one is that you might not think you have the nerve or the confidence to do this on your own. You need a lawyer to speak for you. But that's really, I think, the absolute worst, because the lawyer can't get inside your head. They don't know what you're feeling. They don't know what has been going on behind closed doors. And once you pay them a lot of money, you're going to trust them to make decisions for you, even if you feel in your gut uneasy about it. That's because they're not going to give you this full education about how the system goes, what steps to expect, how to handle each step of the process. They're going to say to you, hey, I got this. You paid me a bunch of money. And so you lose all control and you literally are along for the ride. And you are afraid to talk to your spouse now. It was already complicated and contentious, but now you're actually afraid to open your mouth because you don't want to say something that's going to harm you in some way or upset your lawyer, right? And that's really just not true. It's like impossible for you to say something in a conversation with your spouse that's going to harm you in some way, especially if you're being guided and have the education you need. So the saddest thing about what the lawyers do in the process is really take away your power and your voice and really kind of make you a bystander. I'd say that makes you a victim to the divorce process. Okay, so it makes a bad situation worse. So the truth is, you can create a family transition, and in doing it correctly, you rarely need lawyers. I can't stress it enough. If you do get a lawyer to look over your paperwork, it can wait until the very end, and then you can pay them a few $100s to take what you've created, clean it up, and file it properly at the courthouse if you just want to make sure it gets done. And, you know, that's a personal choice. But my clients, I help them through that process, and they 99.9% of them never talk to another lawyer. Okay, so I think hopefully at this point you can see that how applying these secrets really saves you months of turmoil, thousands and thousands of dollars, and it really protects you and your kids because you're not the victims of the process. You're not being sucked into a contentious, elongated, adversarial process, and you instead are taking control to make healthy, good decisions for your family. So here's what we have covered. You can avoid the toxic system and create a conscious family transition. I promise you. You can do it even if you have no legal background right now. And if you're nervous about how to handle all the issues, you just need the education or the information to make those decisions. And we talked about why running out to hire lawyers can really be one of the worst things that you can do. Certainly financially, and I wholeheartedly believe emotionally as well. So let me ask you a question now, okay? So we've been talking about this. If you want to start a healthy new chapter while saving money and avoiding trauma, like, would you? Would you do it now? And if you could do it and do it right, wouldn't that make that next page, you know, the aftermath, that much sweeter? But I want you to know you can get it right. You can do it on your own. You can get started, or you can be guided by someone like me who has done it successfully and knows how to guide you through and around the pitfalls and traps of the traditional system. So for my clients, I don't know if this would be true for you doing it on your own, but if you come into my program, in the first week, you are tackling what life looks like for you during the separation, or how to tell your husband. Because a lot of my clients come in and say, I need your help from beginning to end. I don't even know how to tell him. And that can be some of the most important part. That conversation can be critical, right? And then you jump that hurdle, and then we decide, okay, what does it look like in our household now that we're moving forward? How do we set up boundaries for ourselves within the house to make sure everybody feels secure, and we diffuse the situation, we diffuse the fear that comes along with this. And so once that's calmed down, we start looking at what is an initial preliminary custody arrangement look like? How, you know, do we do something on a temporary basis while we're kind of feeling our way? You do this calmly and slowly so that everybody is adjusting one step at a time. But really, the timeline is in your hands, but if you want to, within the first month, you could be figuring out what dividing assets is going to look like. And so that's just the first month. Most of my clients, unless they choose otherwise, they have all the things that they need in place to create a full separation agreement and finish up their divorce paperwork. You know, that's fast. That's showing you what's possible. You might say for your family, like, we need to slow it down. We don't want to be actually divorced for a year. You have control over all of that. And you should. This is your life. You know, you are the one who should be controlling that timeline. Okay. So if it sounds like something you want for your family and you're really ready to start that next chapter, I would love to talk to you, to answer your questions, hear where, you know, your situation looks like and how I can help you get started on this family transition. And so I have set aside some time over the next 5 days to try and help as many people as I can really get started on this road. All right, so if you want to talk, I've blocked 45 minutes to talk to you and help you strategize what needs to happen to start your family transition. And talking to me before you run out to talk to lawyers is probably some of the most valuable 45 minutes you can spend, because if I can make you feel confident that you don't need to go down that path right away, you can get started and leave the adversarial process out of it, then I'm really, you know, setting you on a road for a new healthy future. So I want you to book a call. You can click on the link below. I want you to book a call if you know your marriage is over, but you just feel like you're stuck and not sure what to do next. I want you to book that call if you know you're ready to move forward, but you're so terrified of the process and the financial and the emotional cost. And I want you to book the call if you can see that healthy future, but you really feel like you need guidance to get there efficiently and effectively and in a positive way. All right, so there's a bunch of people on here, which is great because I really want to get the message out that there is another way to do this, but I can only handle 10 calls over the next 5 days. So please, if you are ready to get started, please click the link below and apply now. Tell me a little bit about yourself so I know a little bit about you when we talk, and we can just jump right in. Okay, so I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope you feel better. I hope you really realize that you can maintain control of the process, you can create a family transition, and you really can start moving forward towards that healthy family transition that I know you think about at night when you're getting ready to go to sleep. So I hope I talk to you soon. And in the meantime, hang in there and keep believing that anything is possible.